Good evening and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
And I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about Season 6, Episode 3, Sons and Daughters. Before we continue, you can find us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
That is correct. And as I say every single week, you should find us and follow us. And please feel free to send us questions, comments, whatever that you deem fit as we go through this show that I obviously love so much. And obviously you do too, or else you wouldn't be listening along with us. So, yes, as David said, we are doing the third episode of the sixth season. Um, I don't even know how I want to describe this one. We'll get into it, I'm sure. But before we do, like as always, check in. So, David, how has your week been?
Week's been fine. Work, it's funny, on 4th of July was a Thursday. I was like dead at work. And then yesterday and today, slammed. Like, good slammed. Like, people coming in busy. Uh, a number of people kind of just browsing, but it was like dead the day of the holiday, and then the weekend hits, and everyone's still got time off to do things, and here they coming in. And the 4th of July was fun, seeing my nieces, cute as I'll get out, 6 and 3. The 6-year-old, she's lost one of her teeth on her front smile and all that, so the new one's growing in and everything. So yeah, just fun seeing them and hanging out with family. How about you?
So pretty much a lot of the same. We did not actually do a whole lot for the fourth, which I was glad for because it's odd when holidays like this turn up in the middle of the week. You'd have to go back to work the next week, so it's kind of hard to like really go all out for them because you know a lot of times that will leave you out late at night and whatever else, and you have to get up next morning for work. So I really don't like to be coming into work groggy or whatever. So but it was still nice. Got to hang out with the kid. We did stuff in the backyard, and it was hot, of course, because we live in Texas, so everything is hot. But other than that, we had a pretty good, just relaxing, subdued fourth. Our neighbors, they did plenty of fireworks for everybody, so that was just nice to be able to watch that. But yeah, we just enjoyed ourselves. The week overall has been pretty great. I don't envy you at all working holidays. I remember that, and you're right. There were some times when the holiday would be super busy, but then there'd be other times where like it's dead. No one comes in. You're sitting there all day. You've done all this extra work to prepare. You've got balloons, streamers, all the stuff out, and no one comes in. So yeah, I don't envy that at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm other than that, we're pretty much remaining very low key. I am going to my home state pretty soon, couple weeks. Looking forward to that. So I guess this will be a nice update for you to just be aware. In somewhere around, I guess, 2 weeks' time, we won't be here because I won't be here. So
Ah, very
don't
good.
don't come crying that you couldn't find us this week. Don't worry. We'll leave you something to watch and enjoy, but we won't be having a live show or anything like that. So, but yeah, that'll be it for me, and I'll give you some more details as we get closer to that particular time. Anyway, want to just go ahead and jump into this show because I feel like there's actually a lot here that we're going to have to talk about to really get this episode because it's different. It's different than a lot of what we had been seeing um, so far and what it means for everything else that's coming too.
Right.
So, without further ado, do you want to give the summation or do you want me to do it?
It's your turn if you want to do
Okay,
it. Yeah.
that's fine. Yeah, so this is a interesting episode with its start because we see Worf and Jadzia have, I guess, snuck away to have a moment to themselves, and they're making out basically. This is immediately following our previous episode, Rocks and Shoals, because Captain Cisco and Dax and O'Brien and everybody, as we remember from that episode, they had been crash landed, stranded on the planet, and they had to fight off those Shem'Hadar, who were then picked up. They picked up Kevin, the um, the Vorta.
Mhm.
So now they've been rescued from that planet and they are on Martok's ship, the Rotaran, and they're on their way back to Deep Space Nine. Again, Worf and Jadzia are making out while everybody else is just really glad to be getting close to them. And I'm sorry, not on their way back to Deep Space Nine, back to Starbase 375.
Yeah.
I forgot, yeah, because obviously Deep Space Nine is under Dominion control.
I was gonna say there's a bet
Oh,
that
no,
gets
no, no.
made.
Yeah, a bet gets made, showing a surprising bond and friendship between Cisco and Martok, which I really liked
Yeah.
and want to talk about a little bit here. So yeah, they're all excited to get back. Worf is staying with Martok on his ship, and they find out that they're going to get some replacement crew. When the replacements come in, lo and behold, one of the replacements is none other than Alexander Roshenko, Worf's son, kid we have not seen since TNG. So
Yep.
now he's all kind of grown up here and is in the Klingon military. Back on the station, Kira has, really been struck by the death of Vedic Yasim from, again, last episode. She has now decided to kind of get back into, resisting the Cardassians and the Dominion. Her and Odo are having a little secret meeting, planning how they're going to, start making inroads and contacts and so forth. Jake comes into the situation wanting to be given an opportunity to help out. He knows that something's going down, and it wasn't hard for him to figure out that Kira was going to be a part of that. So, yeah, he's asking her for an opportunity. Quark shows up very briefly. He tells Kira that Ducat will be docking soon. Apparently, Ducat is making her greet him every time he comes back to the station. Those little, moments of control. Like I just, yeah. Well,
Golden Cot loves power.
I
That's all he
guess.
cares about.
Quark offers Jake a job, but there's nothing there to that. And then we see Kira going to meet Ducat, and Ducat has brought back his daughter Zial as kind of a treat for Kira to soften her up a little bit. Kira's very happy to see Zial. They talk about they're gonna, she's been removed from the school for a sabbatical, basically, and she's gonna stay on the station with Ducat, which means basically that Ducat now has a reason to invite Kira to things because Zial will be there for stuff.
Right.
Um, Back on the Rotaran, Worf meets up with his son Alexander. He's asking about his parents, Alexander's grandparents. He's asking why Alexander is there, and basically Alexander is playing the role of stubborn teenager here. He's very moody. He's very upset with his dad. He's just like, basically, all my life, all you've done is send me away. Now I'm here of my own choosing. You have no right to interfere, so forth and so on. On the ship, everybody now becomes aware of the fact that Alexander is Worf's son, but Alexander has some issues. He's not your typical Klingon, pretty much to be expected here.
Yeah.
He messes up. He makes mistakes. He clearly doesn't have a whole lot of experience, not with Klingon customs, technology, way of life, or anything like that. But he's not a competent fighter. He's certainly not his father. He gets picked on. He ends up starting kind of a food slash sword or knife fight in the mess hall. Cuts the guy pretty good, but when the guy turns serious, it's clear he's going to kill Alexander. Worf intervenes, much to Alexander's dismay.
Mhm.
Um, but, it's kind of what it is. Alexander doesn't have any kind of experience. They run some training drills once Martok figures out what their next mission is. Alexander forgets to clear a simulation from one of the sensor readouts, which makes them think that an enemy ship is closing in on them. They figure out that it was a mistake on Alexander's part. They fix it, and then he's basically been accepted into the ship as, yeah, kind of the ship's fool, the boy who messes up.
Mhm.
Worf tries to meet with Alexander and give him some sparring batleth lessons.
Mhm.
Does not go well. He confronts Alexander and is like, I know this isn't what you wanted. You told me a long time ago you didn't want to be a warrior. I've embraced the fact that you don't want to be a warrior. So why are you here? And Alexander doesn't really answer him. He just kind of throws it back in Worf's face. He's just like, yeah, I mean, I said I didn't want to be a warrior, and then you abandoned me. You left me with your parents, and you don't check on me, you don't call me, you don't do anything with me. So I'm not going to talk to you and deal with you.
Right.
Worf points out that he had also chosen a particular way of life, and that way that he chose didn't really allow for him to be the kind of father that Alexander probably needed.
Right.
So acknowledging that, and that was the reason why he sent him away to live with his parents, Alexander's grandparents. But that doesn't really soothe Alexander's heart there.
Right.
On the station, Kira and Zial and Ducat are looking over some of Kira, or not Kira, but Zial's work. She's a very promising artist. The artist school that she was going to on Bajor thought she had a lot of talent. She had sent some of her work off to a Cardassian school. They also thought that she had a lot of talent and were going to exhibit some of her pieces in one of their upcoming whatever things that they were going to be doing. She gives this grand speech about how that's what she wants to do with what she wants to do with her work is unite people. She's been trying to intentionally blend Cardassian with Bajoran styles. Um, yeah, all that stuff sounds well and good, but the real issue here is Ducat is really trying to work his way in with Kira. He's trying to ingratiate himself with her a bit. And she's resistant, obviously, as we would expect her to be. Later on, it turns out that she's been invited to what?
Cardassia.
She's been invited
Cardassia.
to Cardassia. They're going to have a celebration, a party in her honor. Ducat buys a dress for her for Kira to wear to the party. Damar delivers it. At first, Kira's excited and likes the dress, but then when she realizes who it's from and what he's up to, she gives it back to him.
Takes it
She
back.
basically tells him, she takes it back. She tells him that whatever you're thinking, this is not going to happen. I don't like you. I don't have anything to do with you. I despise you. Cut it out.
Right.
And she leaves, even though Ducat's like, oh no, it's going to happen. It's very creepy, to say the least. But that's basically what he says. No, it's going to happen. It's
Yeah.
already happening. Basically, it's what he tells her.
Yeah.
He then turns and, as the creepy opportunist that he is, he gives the dress that he had sent to Kira to Zial to wear to the party. That whole, I don't know who wrote that, but that was like a genius move when
Yeah.
it comes to like just showing how he's fixated and what an opportunist he is. That was great.
Yeah.
Um, so so anyway, um, back to Worf and company. They actually end up getting into a battle with some other Geminar ships when they're escorting a convoy. The ship takes some significant damage. Alexander and another Klingon officer, the same one he had been brawling with in the mess hall, are sent to repair some damage.
Yeah.
Alexander does repair the damage. However, he also locks himself into the engineering section where the damage was, which kind of seals himself in there with some poisonous gas. And they make fun of him a little bit for it, but when they finally open the door and he steps out and everybody's laughing or whatever, Worf seems to just kind of, I guess, tacitly embrace him a little bit and escort him out. And that's essentially it. Is there anything
Well,
that
they
I'm forgetting?
well Martok at the end, but I'm sure you're gonna get there.
Oh, yes. Martok gives Alexander a speech about basically what it means to be a warrior and the true reason that other warriors serve, and also about his father, and kind of frames the context for Alexander as to the kind of man that his father is, but also how Alexander is not that kind of man, and he needs to kind of find his own whatever
Right.
path.
Right. But then at the very end of the episode, Martok does induct Alexander into the House of what's
Martok.
House of Martok. Yeah.
Yes,
Um,
Martok. That's their last name,
yeah.
Martok now.
True.
So
True. Um, so yeah, yeah. Like I say, we'll talk about it more, but
yeah,
I think that's
But
pretty
that's
much
essentially
it,
it.
right?
That's
Yeah.
the episode. Oh well, we got at the end, Kira and Zial are talking, and Kira
Oh,
tells Zial about how she is not going to have the relationship with her father that Zial seems to be wanting.
right,
She's like, I love you, you're great, but your father is terrible.
right,
And he's always been terrible. And what he wants from me, he's never going to get from me. So you should stop trying, he should stop trying, or else I'm gonna have to kind of cut you all off.
right.
To which Zial is like, don't make me choose between you and my father. And she's like, I'm not making you choose. I'm just saying, don't try to force us together.
Yeah,
So there it is.
yeah.
I think that, yeah, they kind of make it seem like to a certain degree that Zial was hoping that they would eventually be able to work together and then get together. But that doesn't,
Um,
they never really fully say that.
so you think Zial is aware of Gold Ducat's romantic interest in Kira and actually
I
is trying to
think
help it come along?
I think that Zial is being very naive and being manipulated by her father
I would certainly
to
say that
help.
seems more accurate than
Yeah, to
the other
help
way
with
around.
this.
I don't
Yeah.
think that she actually wants her father to be romantically invested or intimate with Kira per se. I mean, she'd be happy about it, but like a surprise happy, as
Mhm.
opposed to she just wants her father and Kira to get along. She doesn't know exactly why her father wants to get along with Kira so badly, but she wants to get along with Kira. She wants her dad to get along with everybody. She wants life to be, happy and perfect, and so she doesn't necessarily think out what's all going on. Maybe, um, poor girl.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that that's exactly it. And her father is using her because that's what he does.
Yeah,
And he's like I said, he's an opportunist. He sees a way, an opportunity that through her he can achieve his conquest of Kira, and
right.
so that's what he's after.
Yeah, yeah. When he gives the dress to Zial, and she's like, "Oh, it's beautiful. You can sometimes be so thoughtful." And he like pats himself on the back and wiggles, and he's like, "I try."
Yeah, right. He's just like, and that's what I'm saying. He's just such an opportunist. It's
Yeah,
gross,
yeah, yeah.
So
He's terrible. Um, it's so obvious too that if Kira ever did surrender herself to Gold Ducat, he'd immediately lose interest because it's the
oh yeah,
resistance she offers him that attracts him to her,
yeah,
and which is just why it's so creepy and terrible because that's exactly what harassment is, sexual harassment in particular, and abuse is, especially. Like to actively enjoy the resistance of the person you're abusing and harassing is terrible. Yeah, it's like I said last couple times. Like part of me, like again, part of me wants characters to be redeemed, and I want them to go through a character arc. I want them to grow and change, and heck, if they have to go through heroic sacrifice, go through the heroic sacrifice. Gul Dukat has lost his chance. Even if he might have been on the way to some sort of redemption, he's done. He's gone. I don't care
hmm
for it. Someone kill this
hmm
man. Let Kira be the one to finally put him out of his misery for crying out loud. Actually, now that I say it out loud, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe he will eventually have to bite the dust. He's been with the show since the beginning. Uh, maybe his character really does have to truly maybe die here with this whole Dominion War, which makes sense, actually. So I guess now talking out loud makes me predict Golden Cot has to sometime bite the bullet. So we'll have to find out if that's true or not.
So my issue with with Gul Dukat is they do such a great job of setting him up as the anti Cisco, and they even have like similar beats, similar elements, like they're both now anyway. Single fathers. Because as we know, even though Ducat was married and had, I think they said 7 other children,
Something like that.
when the truth about Zial came out, the wife left him and took all the children
Right.
with him.
Right.
So he was now just left with just Zial. And so he's become hyper fixated on Zial to a certain degree. But just like we've seen with other Cardassians in the past, once they've kind of captured that thing that they were fixated on, they quickly lose interest in it and they want to move on to the next thing. And
Right.
that's where Zial kind of comes back and forth into play for Ducat because he's not always so much concerned with her well being as he is with how he can use her for something, how he can achieve some other kind of end
Yeah.
through her.
He would have left her
And
on Bejor if he didn't think she could help him with Kira at
yeah,
all.
yeah, he was perfectly
Sadly,
fine to leave her there.
yeah, yeah. And I'll go ahead and just say it now. The scene where she's showing her art to both of them. Well, first off, I'll say this one thing. First off, I'm not a huge art enthusiast, so that scene did nothing for me, and it felt fake as hell when both of them were like, "Oh, this art is so great!" Like I think Kira thought it was great for real. Gul Dukat couldn't. He doesn't appreciate art either. He couldn't. When
Yeah.
Kira says, "This reminds me of the artwork of this person," I believe her. She probably was genuinely intimating that, even
Hmm.
if she was just saying it to say it, she was at least someone who had appreciated the art of the person she was talking about to say it reminds me of.
Hmm.
Um, and Golducott immediately comes back with a totally obviously, oh yes, and this also reminds me of the Cardassian artist who also did
Right.
art. It's like,
It's like
yeah,
he's basically like, check notes. Who did I Google a little bit ago?
yes,
This guy. He reminds
yes,
reminds
yes.
me of this one.
That's
Yeah.
exactly how it felt.
The
And
one that I
poor Z,
studied on 10 minutes before we all got together.
yeah,
That's
and
the
poor
guy.
Zial is like, "Oh, I just love all the happy little family we have going on here." Like, and
Because
like
she is
Kira's,
they make
yeah,
her seem so naive. And it's
yeah,
weird that they do it because it also makes it very hard to place her age, which is concerning considering Garrick. And we're just like, I know that y'all do things differently in your culture or whatever, but we're gonna need some context here
yeah,
really, really soon.
because she was like 13-ish when we saved her, and that was only like 2 seasons ago. And now
Right.
she's a
And
college student.
right, right. And she's not only a college student, but she's at a point where she could obviously she's deep enough in her college experience that she could also leave college
Yeah,
and it's okay. So it may kind of sound like she was close to graduating anyway and looking for her next thing. So
yeah,
yeah, she was what 6 months to a year out from graduating, and he just kind of swooped in, and now she's on the station. So again, they've aged her up quickly, very
yes,
quickly. So if
yeah.
we wanted to make I guess put her into some kind of frame of reference here, she's the equivalent of what would you say, 20, 21
She
years
comes
old,
off
maybe?
like, yeah, an early 20s year old
Yeah,
girl, especially with Garrick, especially. Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, even with Garrick, it comes off as extremely awkward because he's old enough to be her father, etc. Um, but yeah, you're right. Like, and that's also true. I think of Alexander. I feel like Alexander also grew up faster than he's supposed to have. Right? Am I wrong?
Well, I think Alexander's a little bit more on track, considering that when we last saw him on the Next Generation in season 7, he was already, I think, 10 or 11 years old.
Yeah,
Okay. So he's 11 years old, and now we see him, and he's a fresh recruit on the Rotaran.
yeah,
So since that time, that was seeing him in season 7. Since then, we've had the Generations movie, the First Contact movie, all of season up to season 6 now of Deep Space Nine and Voyager. So I'm thinking, what is that?
well, if TNG
10
and
years?
Voyager have overlapped with Deep Space
They
Nine,
overlap with Deep Space Nine, but they don't overlap with each other.
don't they?
No. When Voyager is launched, Next Generation is done.
Well, no, I'm sorry. I'm talking about with Deep Space Nine. It's TNG, Deep Space Nine, and then Voyager.
Voyager, right.
But Deep Space Nine overlaps with both.
Yes,
And
Deep
if
Space Nine bridges the gap.
yeah, and if TNG ends here, but Deep Space Nine was already 2 seasons in, then the gap between like seasons 3 to 6 is only about 3, 4ish
But
years
we're not talking about Voyager. We're talking about from TNG to where we are
on
in
Deep Space Nine. If I said
right.
Voyager, my apologies. I
Yeah.
meant Deep Space Nine. Um, my whole point is just that it feels like they've also done the same with Alexander. They've aggressively upgraded his age to make him. I
Well,
mean, in
so
Klingon
I
culture,
think
they might
I think in
age
the
faster. They might
and
just,
that's another point I was going to bring up really soon.
yeah, that
But
makes sense. They
I think
age
they
faster, but
grow up different. They definitely develop faster. But I think it's been 10 years from because Deep Space Nine starts with uh yeah, I think Deep Space Nine. Oh crap! I know this timeline, but I'm going to say it's 10 years because when Deep Space Nine starts, they were picking up with Cisco with the Battle of Wolf 359, and then he was a commander. Well, he was a commander then. No, he was a lieutenant commander then. When he starts Deep Space Nine, he's a commander. So I
Right.
think that it's been at least 5 years from that point when we see him as Commander Cisco when the show starts. Then we have all this stuff with him being captain and everything else. So yeah, I think it's 10 years. I think
Oh,
there's a 10-year gap between Alexander on TNG and Alexander now in this episode. I think it's a 10-year time span. So that would also put him at around his early 20s, 21 years of
okay.
age here.
I mean,
Okay.
with Alexander, I feel like having him be a 17-year-old kid in Earth years makes sense. Klingons age faster, maybe,
Yeah.
and I mean, heck, in the World
We
War
certainly know
II,
they develop faster. We
yeah,
know that. Worf
in
has
World
told
War
plenty of stories. We know that.
in World War II, 16 and 17-year-old kids in the Civil War, they ran off to go fight in wars early. And I'm sure the Klingons, being a warrior culture as they are, definitely have a lower age bar for joining the military. Maybe 13-year-olds have, kitchen duty, but
That's
like,
true. As we also know from a TNG episode, a Klingon is considered a warrior the moment he can hold a blade.
exactly.
Because so yeah, technically, well, not even technically at that point, then that means at 3 years old he's a warrior because he can
Yeah. The
hold a
real
knife.
question is how did Alexander end up on the same ship as his dad on
Yeah,
accident?
that is the real question. I mean, if they're in such dire need, which is what we hear throughout most of this episode, the
Yeah.
Klingons have been suffering some significant losses, and if they need people spread out and everything else, how did he end up? It just so happens you end up on the ship that your father's on.
Right.
Come on,
Yeah.
like something's up there. So to that end, since we're on the subject of Worf and Alexander, I think it's very important that we talk about and break down this father-son relationship dynamic. It's probably one of the most maligned in Trek. Worf gets a lot of flack for being a terrible father, and I'm not going to say that anything that we're getting ready to say in this is in any way going to apologize for that. But I think if we frame this in the proper context, I think we can begin to see why, while Worf, what he did was still not okay, it's not as bad as people think. So to do that, I think we have to go all the way back to when Alexander first appears. Worf at the time was 26 years old when Alexander is born. He knew nothing of Kalar even being pregnant, and also
She just shows up
um,
with a kid and
she just
dies
shows
on him.
up. Yeah, and at that time when she showed up, Alexander was already like 2 or 3 years old.
Yep.
Remember, he was really little the very first time that Worf met him. So here's Worf in his prime, doing his career, minding in his own business, and this woman that he clearly is attracted to and wanted to marry, who did not want to marry him. Let's be perfectly clear
That's the
about that.
one flaw with that damn
Yeah.
character. She was great, and she was all
And,
like,
and then she didn't finally marry him, and then a couple hours later, she's murdered. Right? They married in secret, and then she's murdered. But she did not marry him before she had Alexander. She did not want to stay with him. She just wanted to. They were together, and then not. Right? So now all of a sudden she shows up. She's got this little kid. She promptly dies, and now Worf has to figure out how to handle a very young child.
yeah,
He's also dealing with the loss of his recent wife, and he's in the far-flung reaches of deep space. And he's got no parenting experience. His own parents were murdered, so forth and so on. So to me, while I don't necessarily accept it, I understand his desire to send his son somewhere safe where he could
right.
be raised and nurtured, which is what he does.
Yeah, and Worf is
Um,
on the bridge of a freaking starship all the
yeah,
time. So
yeah,
he's not a good place to raise a kid, even if they do have families on the ship. 100%.
yeah,
It's understandable. I feel like this is just another example of the writers wrote themselves into a box, and it's not Worf's fault. It's the writers'
yeah.
fault.
Because even with the other, because I mean, I've heard that argument before too. There's families on the Enterprise. He could have made it work, but even with those other families, they're often two-parent families.
Yeah,
There's the
100%.
mother and the father are there with these children. So it's never on just one person to both do their work, do their duty, and raise the child. There's
Right,
always someone to help things out. Worf doesn't have that.
right.
Even though at some point they kind of awkwardly try to like insinuate Troy in there. Um, yeah, not
Yeah.
good.
Yeah,
So
that was like the last that was a 11th hour thing of
yeah,
TNG. Worf and Troy, maybe?
yeah, yeah. They were just I don't
Because
know. They were just
Riker never
really
could figure it out.
really hurling stuff out of this. So
Yeah.
now we have Alexander, who he goes to live with his grandparents. He eventually comes back to the Enterprise, and he has remarkable freedom for a child, and especially for a Klingon child. He's going to a human school. He's participating in holodeck programs that are like cowboys and Indians, basically. Or he's tramping around with Loxana Troy and enjoying mud baths and balloon people and stuff. So I mean, his upbringing was wild to say the least, but it also was, Worf trying to honor Kalar's wishes, which were to let Alexander kind of grow and experience life the way he wanted to.
Mhm.
He did, I mean, yes, he did try to show Alexander how to be a warrior, but when Alexander turned his back on that way of life, he stopped really pushing him to do it. There were certain cultural events or whatever that, yes, he still made Alexander partake in, but for the most part, he let him go his own path.
Right.
Now, we don't know what happened after the end of The Next Generation because even then, at season 7, as far as we were concerned, Alexander and Worf were still together. Now, we see in Generations, we did not see Alexander on the ship during Generations, but then the Enterprise crashes and Worf kind of loses his way and he ends up going to stay at the monastery. He seems like he's having his own kind of crisis of conscience or faith or whatever you want to call it, and instead of visiting that upon his child and making his child suffer through that, he sends his child once again to stay with his parents
Mhm.
to let them get him through while he figures himself out.
Right.
Now, when he comes out of all this and ends up coming back and he's in Starfleet again and he's on the station, could he have sent for Alexander? Yes, he could
Yeah.
have. And I think that's the point that Alexander makes here because he says, "You haven't talked to me in 5 years."
Right.
So there's our other frame of reference. So it's like, okay, that would mean that at the end of Generations, he sent him away, and now it's been 5 years since that movie, and you haven't sent for him, you haven't contacted him, you haven't done anything. Now, Worf's life has changed significantly since then. He's got a new posting, he's got a new position. They lost that post and that position. He's now back with the Klingon forces. He's his
Engaged
brother, he's engaged. His brother is dead, but not dead. A
and then
lot's happened.
brainwashed.
Yeah, he was in a prison camp. I mean, a lot's happened to the guy, so probably
Yeah.
calling your son is not at the top of your list, especially for a son who you don't have a frame of reference with. His son doesn't want to be
Except his
involved in the way of
parents.
life. Well, no, I'm
Yeah.
I'm saying his son doesn't want to be involved in the way of life that Worf has chosen.
Right.
So again, knowing that about his son and knowing how he's living his life and what he's been going through, what do you say?
Yeah. Again, I that's why I feel like this is more a writer problem than a Worf
Yeah,
problem. I feel like I mean they made this decision about Kalar having a kid in like season 3, right? Like a while ago. A long time ago. And poor Worf has, as a character has been dealing with the writer's decision ever since.
yeah.
So
It was a desire to tell a story
right.
about a fractured family,
Yeah.
but unfortunately, they didn't realize the cultural development and really revolution that Klingons were going to go through over the next 20 years. And because Klingons got a massive amount of development, especially with Next Generation, or not Next Generation, but Deep Space Nine, they get a massive amount of development, and and family connection, family hierarchy, and legacy are very important. So suddenly to have this character who they're constantly like, oh yeah, he's got a kid, it messes up everything else that they're doing. So it's like we have to address this at some point because he does have a kid.
Yeah.
What can we do to fix this problem? Now, an easy fix, a terrible but easy fix, would have been have Alexander die. let him be sucked out of an airlock, contract a disease, something, have him die.
Yeah. That, and I'm glad they haven't, that they have stuck with this problem and they addressed it here. I feel like this episode has problems, and we'll talk about it more as we go on. But yeah, I'm glad they didn't just take it easy out. Kill him off. Glad they didn't
Well,
do that.
they kind of backed themselves into a corner in Next Generation. They couldn't kill him off because, as we
Oh,
know,
that's right.
future Alexander
Yes,
shows up to save Worf.
and he's a
You know,
super warrior. Like he went the
yeah, he's
warrior route.
awesome. He's great.
Yeah,
He's
I feel like it was
wonderful.
this episode we found out that Alexander had decided not to become a warrior. That's the first I remember hearing about this new Alexander.
Yeah, I mean, old Alexander's awesome, but young Alexander sucks, which also just kind of further proves my point. Star Trek doesn't know how to write children. They don't. All the
Yeah,
children and every iteration, they've sucked. Wesley sucks, Alexander sucks, Jake sucks, Molly sucks. The only one who doesn't suck is Kiriyoshi, and that's because we haven't seen him much. So all of them suck. Okay, Cial sucks. You just name it. Oh wait, Nog. But Nog isn't a Federation child, so
well,
all the
actually, but it
Federation
it
children
does
suck.
prove though that the kids that are great are the ones that join Starfleet. Like every other kid, I'm going to become an artist. I'm going to become a reporter. I'm going to become a spacefaring alien. Wesley,
An
I'm a
interdimensional
traveler.
being,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, shut up, Wesley. Um, yeah, I feel
Because
like
you know what it is? You know what it is? It's because, like you said, yes, they join the Federation, but it's because by joining the Federation, they get structure, they get
yes,
discipline.
exactly.
The other ones are these wild, free-spirited, whatever. I'm going to just do whatever I want and
Yeah,
cause no end of trouble for all the people around me, not to mention my parents,
yeah,
just because I can. And I'm
yeah,
looking at you, Jake, with
yeah.
your terrible bus print outfits that you got on.
Well, I love how
Um,
in this episode he's all like, "I have sources with Kira and Odo," and they both like just accept it. Like he is in on the fact that they have a resistance cell already. He's in on like that she has to go to a meeting or something. I forget what the thing
that's
was.
what he says. Oh, so Ducat's still having you greet him every time that he comes back to the
Oh, that's
station.
what it was.
And they're
It's
like,
like
"How do you know that?" And he's like, "I've got
I
my
was,
sources."
and it's
It's like,
like, shut up, Jake.
right. If you weren't the emissary's son, man, this backhand would be
Yeah,
so strong right now.
I know, right? Um, yeah. I feel bad for all these characters because I do feel like you're right. The children have had problems, and I mean, it's a legitimate argument. Like, what do you do? I mean, obviously, military families, that's a real hard thing. In the real world, they're moving all the time.
Hmm.
I know that those marriages are sometimes very hard to maintain. So I know it's rough. I totally understand it, and that's something the show's having to come up against. But man, it's
But it's once
yeah,
again, it's Star Trek writing things that they don't understand. They think that they do, but they don't. And the problem really becomes when they try to take what they think they know and push it onto an alien culture. I think that's why the relationship with Cisco and his family, with his father, Joseph, and with Jake works so well because that is a framework that we know and that we can see. I mean, you don't have to worry about any other cultural overtones. When they try to do the same thing with aliens, and in particular Klingons, it fails because they've already done so much to establish who the Klingons are and what the Klingons are about. And when you
right,
throw in such a very human, very flawed kind of relationship, it doesn't work because the culture that we've seen so far makes that kind of thing meaningless.
right.
So, it that's why I think that the Worf Alexander dynamic sucks. If they had done a better job of framing that, uh, I guess more towards the human side, which really to do so, I think they would have really needed to keep Kalar alive because
And she's a
Kalar was
fantastic
the
character.
yeah, and she was
Ah,
that bridge there um, that would have constantly been reinforcing for Alexander the ability to embrace his humanity while also helping him to understand who his father is. Because a
right,
lot of Alexander's perceived issues with his father stem from Kalar.
yeah,
And it's unfortunate because it was such a long time ago and she died and everything like that. But she was so opposed to the Klingon lifestyle and structure that is kind of why, not even kind of, but that is why Alexander has such a hard time,
Right.
because so many of the things he should have been doing at certain stages of his development, Kalar kept him from doing because she did not want to be
Yeah.
part of that, which is interesting because she then ends up ultimately serving as the Federation's ambassador to Klingons.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah, her role was weird in that way. The dismissal of Klingon culture, being half Klingon, being the ambassador. I never liked that part of her character. I felt it was a bit too contradictory. Um, but she still
It's a
was a great
recurring trope.
character.
It's a recurring trope that they use, is this hatred for part of yourself. They revisit this in Voyager. They have another half Klingon woman, B'Elanna Torres, on Voyager, and she struggles a lot because of the fact that she hates that she's half Klingon.
Right.
I don't know what that is. I don't know where that comes from. This desire to portray people of mixed races, heritages as hating themselves so intensely. I don't think I've ever spoken to anybody of mixed race background who truly feels that way. Or and it's certainly never been expressed to me anyway. But so I don't know if that's a real mindset to have or not. But I do know that Star Trek does it, and I know a lot of other medias do it too. When they have these kind of hybrid characters, they always
Yeah.
seem to hate the fact that
The
they are,
half blood prince in Harry
yeah,
Potter
these
is
yeah,
what
these
Snape
half
calls
breeds
himself.
as they call
Yeah.
them, right? Like there, that goes on a lot, and I don't know where that comes from. I would like to think that it's not true. That culturally, these people do not feel this way. I can get, I guess, maybe a sense of some cultural alienation, but to the extremes that we see it portrayed in entertainment media, I don't think that that really exists. Now, again, I could be wrong. And
Right.
if anybody out there who is of a mixed race and they feel like, oh, I totally identify with Alexander, with Polana, with Kalar, with any of this, if that is true, please let me know because I've never heard that.
Right. Right.
Um, well, I guess asking you shall receive, as they say. We have a comment here that someone says, as a mixed race person myself, I do feel like an outsider all the time, not really fitting in with either side. Okay, so taking what you said here, Vincent, you said you feel like an outsider, but does that mean that you have and this may be too personal a question, and feel free to not answer if it is, or tell me, go to deep space, Perry, whatever. But feeling like an outsider to me sounds different than the kind of loathing and self-hatred that these characters seem to exude in their portrayal. B'Elanna hated that she was half Klingon. Absolutely hated it. Kalar at one point smashes a table on the Enterprise and blames it on her Klingon half, like it's this weird dichotomy that suddenly takes control of her and overrides her rational function.
Right.
Alexander also seems to have some kind of intense hatred for all things Klingon and his father. So again, like do you feel like you have this duality about you that's kind of trying to duke itself out inside you, and at some points one part of your race overrides the other part of your race and you act differently? Is that it? I mean, because I feel like that's what they try to show, and that's not even Spock was probably our most famous hybrid here, and even with him they did that, the constant struggle between being Vulcan and human, and what side is going to come down on, and whatever else. That was their thing.
Right.
So yeah, he's saying I don't really hate myself for being either. Okay, but again, that in Star Trek they don't portray it that way.
Yeah.
It's not a I'm forever an outsider looking in. It's a there is a very distinct part of myself that I hate,
Right.
and if I could, I would cut it out.
Yeah.
Um, but it's just where do they come down on that? Like for our two Klingon hybrids, they all want to get rid of their Klingon half. Spock really more seemed like he wanted to get rid of his human half. He didn't really come to embrace it until much later on in his life. So
Mm.
yeah, but yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's a weird way to portray that, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah. I wonder what that comes from. If there's a storytelling reason they chose, or if it was some other idea and why it keeps repeating. Um, Yeah, it's curious.
Well, I think the short answer on that is they saw the success they had with Spock. Spock is a very, very famous character. If there's one character everybody knows, whether you're a diehard fan of Star Trek or not, it's Spock. And
For
so I
sure.
think that they look for that in other characters, right? I think they look for that or try to instill that from other characters, and I think that's why it comes up so much. I didn't realize how many hybrids we had, though. Yeah, so almost every show has one. So Spock,
Deep Space Nine doesn't.
Kalar, um, Voyager's B'Elanna, Deep Space Nine.
I mean,
They have,
Dax
I,
might in a
I was
sense,
gonna
but
say
no.
they kind of skirt that issue with Dax, but when they do have one, they have Zial.
They have Zial, and actually, I guess you could say that Odo falls in that category, not in the literal like half breed sense, but in the grew up in one culture from
Yeah,
another.
he's the ultimate outsider.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, and then obviously I was gonna say Strange New Worlds has one because Spock is there. Discovery, I guess Saru kind of fits that category as being the ultimate outsider. Um, yeah, but okay. So yeah, it's a very common thing that they keep doing in Trek, but I just don't feel like they execute it well. So, but anyway, back to our discussion of Worf and Alexander here. Um, I think this is the episode where we finally see that those two have kind of accepted each other, and it's because of people like Martok, who now has the opportunity to give Alexander the other side of things. So far, all Alexander's experiences have come from humans or people who favored humans, like his mother, his grandparents, the teachers that he had, Counselor Troy, and so forth. And they were presenting him with a very, very alternative way of life to being a Klingon warrior, being in
Is
Klingon
it
culture,
Troy
Klingon
also
society.
half human? Troy's also a half.
Yeah, there we go. I forgot. Troy is half human.
Yeah,
Man,
you
see
said
they
Troy, and I was gonna be like, wait a minute, I remember now. Keep
that's
going.
right.
Sorry.
Yeah, so there we go. They love their half breeds.
Yeah. A to
Um,
Z.
yes. So yeah, they enjoy putting that in there. But yeah, he's getting this very different perspective. And then all of a sudden you have Martok, who is like uh the ultimate Klingon for us.
Hmm.
He is he's General Martok. He's lost
Yeah,
an eye to the glory of the
and
Empire.
would give the
He's
other one for some fresh whatever it was that was
gosh,
actually alive and wriggling.
yes. I mean, so he talks about Worf, in such a very positive light, probably something that he's never heard from another Klingon. Because think about it, Kalar was always upset with Worf because Worf wanted her to do things the Klingon way, and she didn't want to.
Hmm.
Of course, his parents, his foster parents, love Worf, but they don't really understand him, you know. And then every other Klingon that he's come into contact with has probably hated Worf. I mean, Worf killed Duras. Worf was always exposing the Empire for their hypocrisy and their um,
Double
terrible
standards. Yeah.
dealings. And yeah, he beat up Gowron. Worf is he's been the bane of the existence of a lot of Klingons here.
Yeah.
And so he finally comes into contact with a Klingon who looks at Worf with respect and even, admiration to a bit.
Hmm.
And I really think that helped Alexander out. He's finally getting to hear from somebody who likes his father. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's definitely an important part of that scene where he comes in and talks to Alexander because to be fair to both Worf and Alexander, it turns out that Alexander is actually retreading Worf's steps a bit, not
Hmm.
directly, but obviously is retreading it a bit. Worf tread it directly; he kind of knew what he wanted, whereas poor Alexander, like Worf grew up knowing his father was dead. He didn't have that hanging over his head where his dad was an absent father. He had to make his way in the world because he was alone because no one else was there for him, as opposed to his dad was in this weird won't he come in and be a part of my life kind of thing. And so part of what Alexander is experiencing is that rebellious streak. Am I rebelling in that I'm going away from where my father's path went, or do I rebel by following after him and like basically telling him off along the path, along the way, like I'm gonna be better than you, uh, or you suck, or I'm here and you can't stop me. Like there's all that teenagery angst in
Hmm.
Alexander that Worf didn't have because that wasn't an issue he had to deal with. But it is the same path on some level. So it is good that Martok challenges Alexander a bit. Um, I do feel like they kind of just wrap it up at the end. I think you kind of insinuated it with the, hey, he comes out of the airlock and he's alive, and like even the Klingon that he had that fight with earlier has been suddenly a lot more friendly ever since,
Yeah.
um, and he's like got a brand new respect for him. And yeah, he's brave. He was willing to do hard work, but and maybe Klingons, it's a lot of blustering, a lot of bluffing about who's got what. The fights are there not because they avoid fights, but it's just how they relate. We might see it as bullying, and on some level it is, but they also expect to be challenged. Like, hey, f you for challenging me on this subject. I'm going to prove to you that I'm not a pushover. And as Martok says, Martok thinks that the fight might have gone as far as like getting some bones broken, but
Yeah.
that would have been it. And how bad are broken bones? I mean, come on, as the Klingons, right?
The Klingons,
So
yeah. What's a few broken bones?
yeah. So it's an interesting idea. And again, I've said it once before, or a million times before. I'll say it one more time. The Klingon culture is the biggest success story Star Trek has had for me by making them come alive.
Yeah.
It makes sense in this weird way. Like it's totally upside down world with the Klingons, but for some weird reason it works. Um, and so when Alexander walks over with his plate of food and he's like, "Can I sit here?" And they're like, "Oh, we kept the seat warm just for you." And poor Alexander, you're like, "No, this is them bullying you, kid. Don't fall for it."
Don't
But
fall for it.
like you want him to fight, and like you're happy for him when he gets the cut. And another part of you does want him to like wants Worf to be like, "Nope, you gotta fight your fights, man." And it could be another, but you abandoned me once again. Like it could have gone either way. Like there's Worf couldn't have done the right thing. Either action he had done in that moment when he showed up would have been the wrong thing. Um, not literally, but just like there's no way he could have proven that he made the right decision to anybody. Um, which is why, as soon as he showed up on the ship, they should have told Alexander, "Sorry, we can't have family members directing other family members. That's always a problem." It should have been in the military code already that, yeah, we got to move
Well,
you to another.
well, and that just goes to show you too that with Klingons, I mean, their honor is so intensely tied to battle and success and conquest that I don't think that to them it
Oh, that's true.
it's a
It might be
problem. I
families work
mean
together all the
I mean,
time,
think
probably.
about it.
Yeah,
They even with the induction ceremony when he was inviting those 5 officers to join the Rotarran, one of the first things that they have to do is declare who they are and to what house they belong, so that their
right.
honor is not only bestowed upon them, but also shared with
Their
their
whole
house,
house.
which is
That's
why he
true.
calls out, Alexander, because he says, "Of what house is Roshenko?" And he's like, "No house. My honor is my own."
Right.
So
True.
which I mean they still accept, they still will allow you to do,
Right.
but again we see that there
He's a
is a very
mercenary.
right, there is a very strong familial tie for these things.
Yeah.
So yeah, um again, you're right though about the Klingons being a success, which is weird considering how much about them was so non-existent for so many years, because Klingons are one of the first major enemies we're introduced to in all of Trek.
Right.
Going all the way back to the original series here, the Klingons were an issue then. And then, we didn't really get much on them from the 60s or the 70s. And then in the 80s comes Worf. But even then, we don't really get much of them until we started getting into the
Worf
late
story.
80s, early 90s, Worf story and Deep Space Nine. And
Yeah.
they just really kind of took off. Even now with the new shows, the Discovery did a lot with Klingons, much to some people's dismay. There's a lot of retconning of Klingon culture and stuff that doesn't really jive with what we already knew
Right.
about Klingons. I would hope that they would do this same thing with some other races, like Romulans would be an interesting one to see at some point, but
Yeah,
that hasn't happened yet. But hopefully they use this. They use a kind of a similar model when it comes to fleshing out the idea. Don't make Romulans some kind of weird cut carbon copy of Klingons, but I'm just saying be as thought out,
yeah.
as planned out
They all
with
come off as a bunch of spy masters. Like they're all just the Obsidian Order, just as an entire race.
yeah. Yeah, the Romulan Tal Shiar, and it seems like everybody is involved with being some kind of spy master.
Yeah, because even in the
And
episode where Spock went to like help bring about some sort of peace, it turns out like the
mhm.
guy who was his main contact was ready to backstab him the whole time. Like I remember that episode, and I was just like, how can you anyone trust a Romulan about anything?
Oh yeah, because you can't. That's the
uh,
short answer. You
and they
can't.
had the one Romulan who was dressed as a Vulcan ambassador, and then she got disappeared, and they had to go figure that out. Like, oh my gosh, the
They're
level
all
of
duplicitous.
complexity. Yeah,
They're all duplicitous. But the Romulans have a very interesting backstory, which has never been actually portrayed on screen. We've gotten little bits and pieces of it, like we know that the Romulans are an offshoot of Vulcans, but how that all came to be has never actually been talked about on screen. We just know that there was a split. There is a series of books that talks about it. If you're interested, um, I believe that that series of books is called Unification, as a matter of fact. I know that was the title of the episode, but I also think that's the title of the books, and it goes through the, basically Vulcan history and how these groups kind of did these offshoots of each other, and how one group became the Romulans, the other one became the Remans, and there's like another group that's out there somewhere that's something else. So yeah, there's it's a lot, but if you're interested, I would say go check those out. Um, but yeah, um, I feel like this episode ends on a weird note. It's like
yeah,
oddly positive. I wish they had done a little bit more to show that Worf has really kind of accepted Alexander.
yeah,
I wish they had shown Alexander meet Jadzia, as a matter of fact, since they're
yeah,
all, getting ready to get married and everything like
yeah.
that. There should have been,
Ugh,
hey, here's the woman who's going to be your mom.
yeah. The fact that she doesn't seem to even, I mean, maybe she does know about Alexander. I'm actually she does. But like, yeah, here's your new stepmom.
Now I would assume that she knows about him only because, as we see in this episode, Worf has a picture of him and Alexander that he apparently takes
Sure.
with him everywhere. So there's no way that she hasn't seen this picture before and knows that that kid is his.
Right.
But as to whether or not they've officially met, I don't know. But
Yeah.
I would
Well, obviously
assume,
they haven't. If
yeah,
Worf hasn't, yeah.
yeah, I would
Uh,
assume that they haven't either. Yeah.
and I have to say, Worf and Jadzia, like again, like Worf is once again making some sort of point about the wedding, and Jadzia. What are we even talking about? What is?
It's about being inducted into Martok's family. She has to
Oh,
formally
right. She's
request
like,
to
I don't
be.
want to do it because I don't want to go run off and have to fight a bunch of personal battles I didn't care about. And then she's joking. I just like, woman, you don't respect your man. Like
Well, she
he,
was just teasing him a little bit. Now,
but she
granted, I
does
feel
it
like she shouldn't.
all the
Yeah.
time. That's her whole relationship with Worf. I feel she's just there to get some, excuse my French, but some Klingon and some.
Wow.
That's all she's there for. That's all she wants from Worf. She wants some pounding. That's all she wants. And then she wants to tease
Wow.
him and make fun of him and tickle his humorous bone, but he doesn't have one, and so she just likes to mess with him. I gotta say at this point, I'm not really in love with their relationship. I hope something
Okay.
changes, but right now it seems all
Okay.
like the only reason Worf is committed to her is because he's committed to commitment, and he's not one to like back down from a decision he makes, even if it costs him an arm and a leg. And Jadzia is like, I'm having a good time, so I'm just gonna roll with the flow as it goes. Whatever.
Well, I mean, I guess you could take a lot of that to be, she's very different, but also she's lived so many different lifetimes and whatever else. So probably a lot of this is, old hat to her. So she's probably just looking to have as much fun as possible because she can remember when things were really serious and had all this extra meaning and emphasis on them. And I guess after 7, 8, 9 lifetimes, you kind of
Uh,
just want to do things differently. Which to me, on the one hand, I get why she wants to just make sure everything is fun, but
uh-huh.
another, it's like, why do you intentionally take so much joy out of ribbing this guy who takes himself so seriously?
Mhm.
So I don't know. I don't know what that is. But it was brief in this episode. We were more focused on these guys kind of finding their way. And then, of course, we have Kira and Ducat, which we're going to use this last little bit of time here to talk about these two, and Ducat being the intense creeper that he is. Um, so, as we know, he already intimated once before in another episode that he and Kira already shared a special bond and that it was gonna happen, and it was already happening. She just didn't know it yet.
She has to drive a steak with a bunch of garlic and all the vampiric. I mean, he's a gray ashen race of people anyway. She's got to stab him through the heart by the end of something or other.
So, what do you think Ducat's chances are? Do you okay? Let me phrase this way. Um, do you see him as ever wearing her down, or do you see him being the ultimate despot creeper he is, who will eventually just force himself on her? Which one do you feel like we're gonna get?
I mean, I don't think Kira would ever come to the point of truly being like intimately attracted with him because she's too Bajoran for anything. Like she loves Bajoran culture, her people. The Bajoran
Mhm.
men she's been with have been powerful Bajoran men who have been
Yeah,
classic Bajorans. That was a religious man, so heavily into the
Vedic
Bajoran faith.
Burial,
Edek Barile. We have uh
Shakar, who was the leader
Shakar,
of
who
the
she's now.
resistance,
I mean, they've
who
broken
then
up now, but it's
he's now the
like,
first minister.
yeah. So like, she's too Bajoran to. I mean, it's not that she's so Bajoran that she couldn't be interested in like Odo. I'm not saying she's like Bajorans only over here.
She
Uh,
was into like a Cardassian in that manner.
say again.
She's too Bajoran to like a Cardassian in that
100%, because she
particular manner.
fought them and she fought Gold Dukat in particular. He has been a thorn in her side. She cannot even like in this episode. It's a perfect example. He sends the dress. She likes the dress. She's like, "Wow, this is a great dress." And she looks herself in the mirror and immediately goes, "Hell no, I cannot." There's a part of me that will never be able to just be okay with any of this. So
Yeah.
yeah, if anything ever happens, I mean, let me put it this way: she'll never. The best Gold Dukat could ever hope for, if he truly was hoping for a better relationship with her, would be some sort of like apology, changing into a better person, and like, hey, I'm sorry for all the things I did, and they go their separate ways. Like they finally just put a like she's already kind of put her weapons down in a sense. Like you guys
Mhm.
left. If you had stayed gone, I would have that would have been it. We would have had to keep dealing with you on occasion, but that was just the way things are. Like she's matured. The reason that in the last episode she was the one calling for like peace and like, hey, don't go all
Mhm.
running around trying to cause trouble is because she's had to mature a bit into a position of authority. So yeah, no, Golden Cod doesn't have a chance. And again, the only reason he likes her in the first place is because he likes the friction of his power and manipulation
Yeah.
up against her pulling, fighting back. She doesn't accept any of his BS. She can see through it. Even if she doesn't know exactly what his plan is, she doesn't trust him. And if she does ever trust him, it's only as far as she can see him and hold a grip on his neck and like say, "You ain't going anywhere without my say so." So yeah, it's never gonna happen.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what Goldie wants.
Yeah.
Again, if she ever did truly like swoon for him, he would immediately lose interest. He would lose all interest in her immediately, which is ironic because if Kira would pretend to just give in a little bit, at least long enough for him to start going like, "What the heck?" she would have him off her back immediately. But whatever. So
So I agree, and I feel like the ultimate expression of this power and manipulation for Ducat would be to he continues this game, but eventually, as all games do, they must end. And if he does not get the win that he's
Right.
looking for, I feel like he's the type who would force it on her. And
Mm.
so what we're looking at is kind of this Star Trek's weird power play, power dynamic where ultimately it turns into this person being so abusive and then they, assault this other individual.
Right.
So it's like it's all fun now while she's, um, not necessarily thwarting his advances, but she's out and out telling him it's never going to happen. And
Right.
he's just not accepting the no,
Yeah.
you know.
Hmm.
And so I think that will be the next step. It's interesting to note that the actors for Kira Nerys and Gul Dukat, the non-visitor and Mark Alimo, respectively, um, talk about the dynamic between Kira and Dukat, and he makes it very, very clear that
Hmm.
Dukat really, really wanted her.
Yeah.
Dukat really wanted Kira, and so
Mhm.
much so that he feels it influenced him to a certain degree to
Oh,
have
really?
a latent attraction to Nana.
Yeah, yeah, like, the
Um,
character became yeah, yeah,
yeah,
infused in the
yeah.
actor a bit, yeah,
So yeah, he was like, talking about having to have this kind of obsession and wanting to be this schmoozer and so forth. To which Nana always fires back with just how creepy she thought he was all the time because he was always trying to kind of be this, and it was just hard to see him this way when he was so evil, you know.
mhm,
So a great, way for the two characters to be played up, of course, because you just imagine like being on a set with somebody who is creeping you out, and then you have to play these kind of scenes as well. So
yeah.
fun stuff. And yeah, so real quick before we end it, I will mention Vincent's point here about how Kira kind of personifies Bajor to a certain degree for Ducat, and I think you're right. I think that's another reason why he was so fixated on her, because if he can win over her love and affection and attention, then he can win over all of
Any of them.
Bajor,
Yeah,
any of them. Yeah.
yeah,
So, yeah, she kind of becomes the symbol for that for him.
yeah, yeah.
Well, any final thoughts on this unique episode that we've got here, dealing with the various children of our friends and enemies here?
The one critique I have for this episode we haven't talked about is I was surprised that the resistance that they promised last episode and was hinted in this episode hadn't seemed to be doing much yet. I mean, really, it's just Odo and Kira sitting at Quark's talking about it, and Jake walking up and saying, "I want to play too." Like that
I
was it.
want in. I want in.
Yeah, maybe more is happening behind the scenes, and we'll get like a big episode next week where things suddenly kind of explode on the scene, which would make sense. You know, be kind of a fun way to start an episode. Turns out behind the scenes, things have been happening, and we're here to see them happen. So, but yeah, I was a little surprised that so far it just was all talk and no action. So, but yeah, other than that,
So we're just seeing
yeah,
like the beginning forays here. They're getting everything established. She's even talking about that. Well, we need to get some kind of communication, two-way communication between the station and Bajor. So they're just kind of laying the groundwork here.
yeah,
But yeah, we'll see more in the episodes to come. We've got a lot more to go before we finish this season, let alone the series. So lots of things coming our way here. So be prepared for all that. Um, quick updates. Are there any? No, not really. The Star Trek movie is full steam ahead. The new show, which is going to be about Starfleet Academy, is still continuing to pump out who they've got slated as stars of some form or another on the show. You can find a lot of that on StarTrek.com now. So if you're looking for kind of like a central hub to get all your information about the movie and the new upcoming show, I would suggest going there. All of the new well, not new, but all of Star Trek except for Prodigy has now been listed on Paramount Plus. They did that effective July 2nd. So now you can watch all shows and all movies on Paramount Plus, except for Prodigy, which is exclusively on Netflix at this time. Also, as of this update, you don't have to have like Netflix Europe or whatever. It's just on regular Netflix. So whatever that restriction they had earlier has since gone away. Other than that, guys, I think that's going to do it for us on this episode. You can, again, find us and follow us anywhere you happen to do your social media stuff. And you can listen to us anywhere you happen to listen to podcasts. I do it on Spotify. So join us there. And until next week, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.